Every week we recite our Shabbat prayers, and every week we see this small speed bump in our prayer book. On Shabbat Shuva, insert something. It is a little strange if you think about it. For the 98% of the time that it is not Shabbat Shuva, we deal with this interruption all for the sake of the 1 week each year that it is Shabbat Shuva. Even if you know nothing about this day, that alone tells you that it must be important. But why is it that most of us know relatively little about this particular Shabbat? We sit now in the middle of the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. Rosh Hashanah is behind us, Yom Kippur is upon us. Before that, we had Slichot, and after Yom Kippur, we will have Sukkot and Simchat Torah. It's safe to say that in the midst of all of this, no one out there is thinking, I can't wait for Shabbat Shuvah. Yom Kippur is often described as the holiest day of the year. But just because today, this Shabbat, isn't as holy as Yom Kippur, it is still holy. Each Shabbat, along with the Torah, we read Haftarah, an additional reading from the prophets. Now, if you look at a Haftarah commentary, you will see that for each Shabbat, there is one prophet assigned to it: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Judges. But Shabbat Shuvah is different. There's not one or two, but there are three separate readings, Haftarah readings, for this Shabbat, the only one of the entire year. What are those readings? We read first from Hosea, Return, O Israel, to Adonai your God. Shuvah Yisrael ad Adonai Elohecha. Shuvah, that first word, that is where we get the name of this Shabbat. And then we read from the book of Micah, Who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity and remitting transgression? And finally, that follows from the book of Joel, Blow a horn in Zion, solemnize a fast, proclaim an assembly. The early sages constructed this Shabbat with those three readings to form a clear message. Repent, God will forgive you, and prepare for Yom Kippur. Rabbi Dr. Ruvain Hammer notes that because of the importance of this Sabbath, rabbis have customarily delivered a special, often lengthy sermon on Shabbat Shuvah, even in places where it is not or was not customary for rabbis to preach each week. You'll be happy to hear I will not be taking the customary approach tonight. But I did want to offer a few words and thoughts on the topic of tonight, which is youth. At first, I realized this might seem like a strange pairing. Why have this youth service on this of all Shabbats? But I think there is a good reason. Just a few verses beyond where the prophet Joel instructs us to sound the shofar and sanctify a day of fasting, we read this: Your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your elders will dream dreams, and your youth shall see visions. Your youth shall see visions. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but I was actually once a youth. And I've been thinking about that time, specifically my time in synagogue. I think back fondly to the bat and bar mitzvah parties where I would lead a small select group of my peers up the ladder on the roof of our synagogue. As the adults in the parking lot were yelling at me to come down, I can't help but think that they surely thought, that youth, he sees visions. And if any of them happen to be watching tonight, I'm a rabbi now. You probably didn't see that one coming either. But the memory that sticks with me most was taking part in a youth service. Similar to this, but, well, with people. Things were different back then. To be honest, I don't remember much about what happened during the service. But what I remember, as if it were yesterday, was what happened immediately after. There we were, crowded on a small bima, and I looked up and I saw my friend, who I'll call Rachel, because that's her name, who had inadvertently gotten a bit too close to the Shabbat candles. Rachel had fairly long hair, and she also happened to be somewhat short. You could probably see where this is going. As I looked up, I saw Rachel smiling, wishing someone a Shabbat Shalom, while her head was on fire. Like I said, it's hard to remember much else from that night. All I really remember is seeing Rachel there, and then me running across the bima and frantically hitting her head. All the while, she was totally oblivious to the fact that she had turned into the burning bush. And the smell. I remember the smell, along with everyone else who was in that chapel that night, or we'll say the week that followed. But fortunately, aside from losing some hair, Rachel was unharmed. I was very involved in my synagogue youth group. I went to more services, youth group programs, regional events than I can count. And I've thought a lot about why. Out of all of those experiences, it is this event, in this moment, that inevitably stands out the most. It is ironic that for many of us, our most cherished experiences are when things don't go quite according to plan. Why am I here? Standing here as a rabbi. I am here because my family belonged to a synagogue that was not about to let a little self-immolation cancel the annual youth service. Maybe they would reconsider where they put the candles on the bima, but the service would go on. Why? The old dream dreams, but the youth see visions. In this holy season, it is our job to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be, as it should be. And that task becomes harder the older we get. We become set in our ways and we become accepting of the injustices, both small and large, that are all around us. That's just the way it is, we say. What is this vision of youth? It is seeing an age-old problem with fresh eyes and saying, that insane and crazy thing is insane and crazy. And for those of us that count ourselves as former youth, what is our job? It is to avoid the temptation to respond to the youth and their visions by saying, but see, it's more complicated than you realize. Or, but you won't be bothered about that when you get older. Or, the world, I'm sorry to say, is cruel. That's just the way it is. Why a youth service and why now? With all our wisdom, with all our collective billions of years of life experience in human society, with all of that, let us look at what we have managed to produce. We inhabit a world on the course to environmental catastrophe. We live in a society with a surplus of food where millions go hungry every day. A country where the quality of a child's education is based on where her parents can afford to live. And countless other horrors. That's just the way it is, we say. It's an unfair burden to expect the next generation to solve the problems we have created. But I humbly suggest we acknowledge that listening to their vision might be a vast improvement compared to the world that we have created. May we enter 5781 with fresh eyes. May we be willing to see ourselves and our world as they can be. And may we be able to listen to those younger than us and to be inspired by their vision. Shabbat Shalom.